Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Umir, who's a professional football scout and analyst, and we're here today to cover if Jamie Gittens is worth £50 million as his move has been here we go to Chelsea. Right, good morning Umir. This move has been one that's actually been in the works for about a month or so now, and I think there's always been this idea that maybe Chelsea are going to go for Garnacho was rumoured quite heavily at one point, but it does look like, as the reports are suggesting, that Jamie Gittens is actually going to be the one to make the move from Dortmund to Chelsea. And he's been a player who's, I want to say, had a breakout season this season. He's got 8 goals, 4 assists in 32 Bundesliga games, which is an outstanding contribution in terms of what we're talking about for the price tag and stuff. But he's still 20 years old, and he's now started to find his feet in senior football, and 148 minutes per direct goal involvement, which is pretty strong for a player of his experience. And for Dortmund this season, they've a club who've been through a couple managers this season, been chopping and changing. I think Kovac has actually moved most recently to a 5-back, which doesn't fit him in, so it's a bit complicated to get him in. So I think it's the right time for Jamie Gittens to move. I think the biggest question out of everything is he ready, in your opinion, to take that step? And is it a player who you could see translating to not only Chelsea, but the Premier League well?
I would be inclined to say yes. Obviously, we'll probably need to see a little bit more from him before we can be sure. But if I'm basing it off of everything that I've seen, and if I'm also basing it off of the fact that his youth development was also through the English sort of scheme, I think he kind of has a lot of the skills for him to succeed in English football. We're talking about Chelsea. I think whenever you talk about somebody's ability to scale to a certain league or a certain country, it's ultimately how the team uses that player that determines how well they do when they arrive in that league or in that country. I think obviously, understanding the language, understanding the culture matters a lot. Understanding how the referees do enforce certain decisions, because that differs league on league. The pace and physicality of the game, I think he will not necessarily have too much of a problem with either. He's a player who is really quick, he's really agile, he's got a great turn of direction and turn of pace as well. So I think all of those qualities in tandem give him a lot of potential and a lot of quality right now, actually, to excel if used in the right way. And we're certainly going to get into how he's best profiled and whether or not Chelsea can platform him in that way. But I'd be really excited to see him in the Premier League, and I think he would do well.
Yeah, so I think we're going to get started. It's funny that so when he moved to Dortmund, he played United in the UEFA Youth League when Dortmund knocked us out, and I think he scored 2 goals in that game. And he was frightening at that level. And one thing that for me that stood out is something that you've mentioned there, is the sheer pace of Jamie Gittens. He's probably one of the fastest players I've watched this season. And I think in general, his first step, his acceleration, sort of the way he lures in defenders with these, a lot of touches. He's like tapping the ball towards them, and then it's one big burst. His first step's really quick. He's got quite long legs. He's not a tall player, but he's all leg. Do you know what I mean?
He seems when you watch him, he seems like a tall player. Does that make sense?
Yeah. He's got them. I like to Liao legs, where like when you're watching him run, he's like bloody hell. Like, his legs are huge, but yeah, he's a player who's this season especially has been one of the best 1v1 dribblers in Europe. So we're going to get into how that is the case and how that looks. So in front of me here, I've got a really, chunky sized bit of data which shows about every single winger that played for Chelsea last season, or natural winger. We've got their per 90 numbers stemming from goals and assists, to stuff like XG from take-ons, fouls, 10-metre progressive carries. And highlighted in yellow is all of the attributes or all of the metrics that Jamie Gittens stands out for in the Chelsea squad. And there's a massive cluster halfway down the pack, which means he's top of the pack for dribbles, opposition box take-ons with goal, take-ons with chances created, take-ons with assist. It's all take-ons, dribbling numbers. And that is a really good sign for me when I look at Chelsea. So I think Enzo Maresca has been, this manager who's mostly set up in this 3-2-2-3 pretty much. But the wingers have always been the players who are, having these situations where they're facing a deep block. And sometimes actually it's a 2v1 if the other winger comes down. And it's how much can we fashion chances from these situations. We'll have a fullback maybe making these underlapping runs, a midfielder maybe rotating out wide, left centre half looming out here. But it's how effective can a player be from this situation? And that, when I was watching Chelsea last season especially, and even now in the Club World Cup, these situations, if you can work well in these situations, you will probably work well at Chelsea in terms of doing
you'll make Chelsea better as well, I think.
Yeah, exactly that. So we're looking at players who can handle 1v1s and generate not just goals but assists. And to show you how good Jamie Gittens is at doing that, I have got the big European 5 leagues, so every single player in Europe this season. And we've got XG from take-ons and expected assists from take-ons. And we've combined them together. The only player to have more combined XG and expected assists than Jamie Gittens off the dribble is Kylian Mbappe. So the players below him as well: Vinicius Junior, Ekitike, Salah, Marmoush, Wirtz, Leao, Yamal. They're the best dribblers in the world. They are some of the best.
But in terms of taking advantage of any space that gets given to them.
Yeah, and I think this season for Dortmund, when I was watching them quite a lot actually, I was noticing that, especially under Nuri Sahin was a manager who wanted the slow base possession, very kind of rigid positional structure, and he was basically being tasked with holding these wide areas, holding it down, and being a master at 1v1s. And I think that actually suited him better under Nuri Sahin than his second half of the season, where he did start to tail off a little bit in terms of his output, maybe a bit of burnout, if anything. And yeah, I think for me, when I'm looking at it, I've got loads of more data on Jamie Gittens, but I want to put this onto you. I think, can you go into sort of the technical side of his dribbling? We just spoke off camera just briefly about his approach to 1v1 situations and why they are so impressive. Can you just, give a bit of detail on why his technique on the dribble so high end? Yeah,
in the same way that you've got all of your notes, I've scribbled all of these random workings about why I think his dribbling is so impressive. And like we mentioned off camera, one of the first things that he does is when he receives, he likes to turn his body and almost receive kind of facing the opposition. He can receive back to goal and back to his opposition's fullback as well, but he likes to kind of bring the ball and face up the opposition fullback. And when he does receive, I think that's probably due to some of his academy kind of tutoring and his training in those parts of his career. But it's a very nice and sort of fluid motion in terms of how he receives and faces up defenders. When he does face them up, he squares them up and he likes to drive kind of a little bit centrally.
Yeah.
So if you imagine the opposition defender and sort of a line down their body and where their hips might be aligned, he likes to kind of drive towards their hips and he almost freezes the opposition's fullback in doing so. He doesn't sprint directly at that fullback, but he kind of carries it sort of gradually at times. One thing that's really brilliant about him, and I think about Martinelli in this fashion, is his ability to carry, slow down, and then burst again.
Yes.
That's something that Leao does, like we mentioned earlier, but it's something that Martinelli is also very good at. Martinelli is a little bit of a different dribbler. He's kind of a sort of a knock and run past his dribble, his opposition fullback in his dribbling sort of technique, whereas Gittens is a little bit different. Although he uses those changes of pace a lot to get past his man, he also uses changes of direction really well. He uses his skill moves. Sometimes players kind of do skill moves for the sake of it a little bit, but his skill moves are very deceptive. He drops the shoulder a lot. He's very heavy on these step overs, and he can go inside or outside as well. So when you're thinking about a dribbler, the fact that he can freeze his opposition player, the fact that he can change direction and he can change pace, he can go on the inside and outside, that's a very complete dribbler. He can basically do all of the parts of wing play that you want. And it's not only on the left side, he's had moments where he's played on the right hand side and he's done the exact same.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll mention is I really like how sometimes when he's under pressure, he does cut back inside. When he does move inside and a little bit backwards, it's hard for the opposition player to get the ball because there's so much distance between the ball, him, and then the defender. And then in those situations, he looks to play a switch as well. So he doesn't always go for the take on, although he's very aggressive in trying to take his man on. At times, he can sort of slow it down and switch the play as well. So, like technique-wise, really impressive dribbler. He's really stood out to me on this watch.
Yeah, I think it's quite mental how when you watch him, dribbling's just the standout quality. Like the efficiency on the dribble is just really, really sound. And I do think his goal getting is something. He scored 8 goals in the Bundesliga, and if you watch all the goals, it literally comes from squaring fullback on inside far corner, or counter attack. He's left 1v1 with the centre half here, takes the centre half on, and then it goes. I think he's a very interesting case study for me, because I'm looking around him, and we did this quite heavily on the Sesko piece, where I'm like, he's going from Dortmund to Chelsea. What do Chelsea have that Dortmund don't have? And they have this sort of sustained pressure. They kind of maximise his ability to always go 1v1. Guirassi's a brilliant centre forward, so I'm not going to say, X player's better than Guirassy, because he is amazing. But yeah, I think in general, the runners around him, I can imagine like the Enzo Fernandez sort of link up here. I think that could work really well. And I have a really, really positive feeling about Gittens, especially when it comes to the sort of the Maresca profile of you stay high, wide, 1v1 dribble, crosses. I wanted to ask you, when I'm looking at dribblers, I think a lot of people mention the Bundesliga stuff and, sort of how does that fare when you're adjusting to the Premier League from the Bundesliga? Do you see anything there? I'm talking about, he's a very lean player, he's a very lean and leggy player. Could he maybe physically, shoulder to shoulder, could he be a little bit tested there in the Premier League?
I think one thing about Premier League defences is they double up on men really well. And especially if you've got a really strong winger on the opposition side, in the 4-4-2s or in the 5-3-2 shapes that teams will play in. If you get him 1v1 against a fullback, I think Gittens is brilliant. If you double up on him, I think he still can do a good job, but you're obviously taking away a lot of his ability and some of those angles to really excel in, okay?
Yeah.
I think to Doku as like a comparative example, because they're both sort of excellent 1v1 dribblers. Yeah. Doku's still able to fashion a chance for himself individually in sort of a 3-2-5 base shape, which Maresca might opt to use. So in that case, I do think Gittens will still have the ability to, through his ingenuity, through his stepovers, through his feints, even if he's marked with 2 players, get to the byline. I think he'll struggle to come inside if he is doubled up on, which is what Doku has also struggled with at times. He can fashion a chance and come inside, but it's either to recycle play or to get to the byline. Whereas Gittens, some of his best work came cutting inside and playing in those sort of left half space areas. So it'll be up to those left central midfielders and players in those left central midfield zones, whether that's Kukurea coming in from left back, whether that's Enzo, for example, pulling defenders away for him to then express his quality moving inside. And Enzo, he's a good passer and he's better at crashing the box as well in recent seasons too. But does he have that leg, that legginess, to run up and down all the time and give him a bit of space? So that's my only question about that transferability. When we're talking about him and sort of the physical nature of the Premier League, they will double up on him with more aggression. I do think he has the answers and the ingenuity in his dribble to still make use of that. But there's some question marks around that in my opinion.
If you're enjoying the video and want more tactical analysis and podcasts, please press the subscribe button below and hit the bell to enable post notifications. Yes, obviously we're talking about a 20-year-old player who's sort of just cracked into consistent starting in Europe, and this means that he's not a full ready player as it stands. And I wanted to tell you about a few weaknesses that maybe I noticed that I think could be a problem sort of for Chelsea. I think one of the biggest things is probably the decision making on the dribble. I think when you're such a good dribbler, you sort of take the onus on yourself to be like, I'm gonna do it all. And he did mention recently in an interview that he's learned to stop trying dribbles on the halfway line and start trying them way deeper when the team's got a little bit more, dominance and superiority in the opposition's third. But I think in general his decision making is very tunnel vision like, and I think he's a player who's, when you speak about wingers, it's like, can they combine? I think his combination play in terms of if I'm here, you're here, the 1-2s giving goals, I don't think it's good. I don't think it's good enough standard. I do think it's very, very inconsistent. It's a second thought. I think his first thought is, can I beat me fullback? And then his second thought is, if I can't beat me fullback, it's not, can I find a pass inside? It's probably reset and recycle. And I think for a team like Chelsea, as you just mentioned there, that have these underlapping runners, he'll have support from the left centre-back and he'll have support from the pivot. I think sort of the combination and the link-up play, I think could be an area where he could do more. I think his crossing is very hit and miss as well. Yeah. I'm trying to, in my head, when I think about crossing, I'm like, it's really hard to gauge because if you've got 4 bodies in the box and if the cross is under hit, over hit, is it bad execution or is that like I'm aiming for the near post? Or do you know what I'm like, really, I really struggle. But sometimes it really is just wild swings. But I think Chelsea crashed the box enough, well enough, to sort of force second balls, turnovers from wayward crosses. I think just the danger of putting a ball in there is good. He's good enough. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it's good enough. And I think Pedro Neto's a very inconsistent crosser, and I think he's suffered through sort of the same problems of crossing against the deep block. And I think he goes too low, too flat with the crosses.
I will just mention the zones that I've noticed him being a good crosser in is when he comes back out. So obviously, if he's playing here 2v1 kind of thing, if he comes a little bit deeper and he plays an in-swinging cross with his right foot, those crosses tend to be good. When he's forced to sort of come to the byline and cut it back, I mean that's where there's a hit and miss element, in my opinion. But whether or not he forms a good connection with certain players or is tasked with hitting a certain area, he might be able to elevate his cross success rate from hitting the byline. Like I mentioned before, if you're doubling up on him, he'll hit the byline more than he'll be able to cut inside. So you're nullifying his better ability to in-swing the crosses. So you'll have to improve his byline crosses. And as a Manchester City fan, Doku gets to the byline all of the time.
But the final,
and his cutbacks are what always leave me wanting a little bit more, wanting to see that get to the final player and put that away. So in the same way, his better crosses are from a zone that he might not be able to access as much. But if they can get him in those zones, I do believe that, for example, someone running at the back post or Liam Delap as well in the air would be a good recipient of those in-swinging crosses.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Maresca's done really well sort of last season is his ability to get the fullbacks into the box in really unique areas and having these runners into the box where they're not picked up and inverting the fullbacks not in midfield but higher and then getting them as an unpredictable runner. I think that's something that Enzo Maresca deserves a lot of credit for, even though stylistically and profile-wise it might not be absolutely ideal. He has found a way to put an extra body in the box that is sort of an unpredictable man in there who's not usually picked up. And I think He's shooting. It's actually it's quite amazing because you watch the goals and you're like, wow, he's one of these players who sort of traditional right-footed left winger, especially from these spaces where he cuts in and it's this to the far corner all the time. And he scored a lot of goals like that, and I wasn't really finding much variability in the goals or so much difference in the goals. He scored one header on the final, I think, like one of the final days of the season, which was just a bit like.
Oh, wow. You've got that in your bag as well.
Yeah, I was like, okay, mental. But yeah, I think he's a player who's got really patchy shooting. I think he can strike the ball really well.
Agreed.
But it's the consistency of that ball striking, and I'm looking at a player who's capable of sticking it in the top corner, but there's a lot of shots where it's sort of, he gets too much toe on the ball, he's like over the ball too much and it just trickles towards the keeper and the ball never like lifts off the floor. But he's one of them players who's sort of like laces top corner, quite a bit of swaz actually. He's got quite a good whip on the ball, which is why obviously you would think he'd favour the sort of in-swinging cross. But yeah, I think he's a really interesting profile, and I think we have to cover the weaknesses because he's such a young player. I can actually say he's an inexperienced player at this point in his career, and I don't want to sort of pull him all the way up to drag him all the way down. But he's a very, very young player. He's going for a lot of money to Chelsea, and he's a player who has a lot of positives and weaknesses. But he's now got Noni Madueke and Pedro Neto, who should, as senior players, be able to take a lot of burden off him. But when we're looking at the data, like we said, and we're looking for what Maresca needs, stylistically going into next season, he's the best for what Maresca needs, 1v1. But yeah, have you got any more weaknesses, talking points on Gittens transferring to Chelsea?
Not generally. I think we've covered it quite well. I will reiterate, I'm a big fan of his pure ball striking ability.
Yeah.
He's a very instinctive shooter. He can shoot off of both feet, and he's willing to shoot off of both feet. In his ability to be very willing to force the issue, I actually don't think that's a bad thing for teams like Chelsea and teams like Arsenal, who not become too predictable, but become a little bit too safe. When you've got a lot of players who keep the ball really well, and you've got a lot of players who kind of can win the ball back in their counter pressing really well. You've got good 1v1 defenders at the back. I like when teams have one player who's a little bit, or one or two players who are a bit exciting, who force the issue, and even if it causes you to concede one or two extra counter attacks a half, I think it gives you the upside of scoring an extra goal or two a game in general. So that ball striking ability, the ability to force the issue, the ability to generate separation really well, they're all good signs for me.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't want to say he's sort of the best winger in the world.
The finish article,
but I do think he's probably going to be better than what people unfamiliar with him might think he will be. So I'm a big fan of what I've seen, and I do think him, for example, Madueke on the right wing, Liam Delap down the middle, Cole Palmer behind them. It's a really nice, really nice young front four. 3 ex-Manchester City players in there.
Joe Shields.
Yeah, Joe Shields, he's doing the business.
The man with a plan.
Yeah, pains me a little bit because
should have been you.
You watch them all throughout the academy, but really good young talents. Deserve to be at the highest stage of football. So.
Yeah, whilst I think he's a very raw player, just to wrap up from my side, whilst I think he's a very raw player, I will say I don't think there's a better team that could have suited him, maybe apart from Arsenal. Arsenal and Chelsea, for me, are probably the best fitting clubs for Gittens, and I think Chelsea potentially could have got a steal here, but I think in a market where, think of Maresca, for example, went for 70 million euros, I think it's right. I think it's right to panic and be a bit, set back by the fee. But as we've just said there, we're looking for 1v1 quality on the dribble, X factor, forcing the issue, change the pace of the game. How many times do you dominate your 1v1s? How many times can we get you in the positions to dominate the 1v1s? And as we've gone through numerous times in the data and through the technical analysis of his dribbling, this is probably one of the best in Europe, and he's only 20 years old. So a lot to like about him. And I think as well, if Chelsea do have some of them transition moments like we've mentioned, he's fast enough.
Cutting inside and running those spaces. Yeah,
fast enough. Delap with him, Cole Palmer with him. He will be a transition threat as well. I'm not saying he's a pure deep block guy, but just look at the pace and the legs on him.
And all the carry stats.
You'll come to the conclusion that this is probably a player who would transition quite well to playing counter-attacking football in some games. So, I think he just needs time. Bit of decision-making, bit of comfortability, bit of people around him. He's a very, very kind of humble and quiet guy, and I was listening to an interview where he said, I just love playing football, and I just think if you don't love playing football, you're not doing it for the right reasons. And he does really love the game, and he strikes me as a player who, similar to Leao, I keep coming back to that comparison. He dribbles with a smile on his face, and I kind of rate that about players who just enjoy playing the game. And he's one of them players who I've probably be rooting for a little bit quietly because he's a really nice, humble guy. He has characteristics that I love, and brilliant young player, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, but he'll do well at Chelsea. But thank you very much for watching this episode. If you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment, and follow the channel. And we're back next week for some more analysis.